I never thought my life would take a turn into the terrifying realm of the unknown. But sometimes reality can be stranger than fiction. This is my story, one that involves police, a small town, and an inexplicable event that still haunts me to this day. It all began on a chilly autumn evening in 2018. I had just moved to a quaint little town in the Midwest, eager to leave behind the chaotic city life for a quieter existence. The town was picturesque, with its old brick buildings and tree-lined streets that glowed with shades of red and orange as the leaves fell. I was looking forward to long hikes in the nearby woods and quiet nights spent reading by the fireplace. However, beneath this serene facade lay a history steeped in mystery and fear. I had only been living in the town for a few weeks when I started hearing rumors from my neighbors. They spoke in hushed tones about strange happenings late at night. People reported hearing footsteps outside their homes, and there were whispers about a figure seen lurking in the shadows. They called it the Watchman, a local legend said to be the spirit of a long-dead police officer who had once patrolled the streets. According to the stories, he watched over the town, but also warned of an impending danger. At first, I dismissed these tales as mere folklore. I was a rational person, a recent graduate who had studied criminal justice and believed in facts over fiction. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to know more about this so-called watchman. I decided to visit the local library to dig into the town's history. The library was an old building, filled with the musty scent of aged books. As I searched through dusty archives, I stumbled upon a newspaper article dated back to the 1970s. It detailed the unsolved murder of a police officer named Officer James Reynolds, who had been found dead in the woods just outside of town. The article was sparse, mentioning that he had been investigating a string of break-ins and had vanished one night. The case was cold, and the circumstances surrounding his death remained a mystery. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read the article. The same woods where his body had been discovered were only a short hike from my new home. Intrigued, I decided to explore those woods. That weekend, I packed a small backpack with some water and snacks and set out to uncover the truth about Officer Reynolds and the legend of the Watchman. The trail was overgrown, and the deeper I ventured into the woods, the more isolated I felt. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I brushed it off, attributing it to my overactive imagination. As I hiked, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin that seemed out of place. The door hung loosely on its hinges, and the windows were cracked and dirty. I approached cautiously, curiosity piqued. As I stepped inside, the air was stale, and dust particles danced in the shafts of light streaming through the broken windows. There were remnants of old furniture and a worn-out police badge lying on the floor, tarnished and forgotten. My heart raced. I couldn't believe I had found something so eerie and significant. Suddenly, a noise outside made me freeze. It sounded like footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. My instincts kicked in, and I quickly ducked behind a battered armchair, my heart pounding in my ears. I waited, breathless, straining to hear anything that would indicate who or what was out there. The footsteps grew closer, and I could hear a low murmur. I peeked out from my hiding spot and saw a figure standing in the doorway. The man was dressed in a faded police uniform, but his face was obscured by shadows. My heart raced as I recognized the badge on his chest. It was identical to the one I had found inside the cabin. I felt a wave of terror wash over me. This was the legendary Watchman. For a moment, I was frozen in place, caught between fear and the urge to flee. The figure turned slightly, and I caught a glimpse of his face. It was gaunt and hollow, with eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. He looked around, scanning the area as if searching for something. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't notice me. The watchman stepped further into the cabin, his movements slow and deliberate. I realized that he was not there for me. He seemed to be looking for something, or someone. The whispers I had heard from my neighbors came flooding back to me. The tales of his watchful presence and the warning of danger. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Whatever he was looking for was not a friendly visit. In a moment of panic, I decided to make a break for it. I crouched low and dashed for the door, hoping to slip away unnoticed. But as I stepped outside, I glanced back to see the watchman standing in the doorway, staring directly at me. His eyes were filled with a deep sorrow, and I felt a chill run down my spine, as if he were warning me not to go any further. I bolted down the path, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the woods, gasping for breath. I had come seeking answers, but I had only uncovered more questions. What had I just witnessed? Who was the watchman, and what did he want? That night, I was too shaken to sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of Officer Reynolds and the unfinished business that kept his spirit tethered to the town. I felt compelled to speak with the local police department, hoping to find more information about the officer and his unsolved case. Perhaps they could shed light on the haunting figure I had encountered. The next morning, I visited the station. The officers were friendly but looked at me oddly when I mentioned the watchman. They shared their own stories of strange occurrences and sightings, but they brushed it off as urban legends. However, Detective Harris, an older officer with a weathered face, seemed intrigued. He told me about the night Officer Reynolds had disappeared and how he had been investigating a local gang involved in a series of burglaries. He was on the verge of cracking the case, Detective Harris said, a frown creasing his forehead. We always believed someone wanted him out of the picture. As he spoke, I realized that Officer Reynolds had not only been a victim, he had been a protector. The watchman wasn't just a ghost. He was a symbol of justice that never died. I asked Detective Harris if they had ever found out who was responsible for the officer's death, but he shook his head. The case went cold. We didn't have any leads, and eventually, it was just forgotten, he replied, disappointment etched on his face. That evening, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to do something. I decided to return to the woods and the cabin, hoping to communicate with the watchman. I gathered some candles, a notebook, and a flashlight, determined to understand what he needed from me. Once again, I found myself hiking through the dimming light of dusk, the trees casting long shadows across my path. The cabin loomed ahead, more ominous than before. I set up my candles inside, lighting them one by one as I sat on the dusty floor, clutching my notebook tightly. Officer Reynolds, I called out softly. I want to help you. If you're here, please show yourself. I sat in silence, the only sounds being the rustle of leaves outside and the distant call of an owl. Hours passed, and just when I began to doubt my decision, the air around me grew cold. The candles flickered, and I felt a presence, heavy and watchful. Then I saw him. The figure of the watchman materialized in the corner of the cabin, the dim light revealing the details of his uniform and badge. My heart raced, but I stood my ground, determined to communicate. What do you want? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, and I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. Anger, sorrow, and a sense of urgency. He pointed to the ground, and I realized he was urging me to look for something. I grabbed my flashlight and began to search the floor, moving aside the debris and dust. Suddenly, my light caught something glimmering beneath a loose floorboard. I pried it up and revealed a small, rusty box. With trembling hands, I opened it to find several photographs, newspaper clippings, and a stack of documents related to the gang officer Reynolds had been investigating. It was the evidence that could finally solve the case. As I examined the contents, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had uncovered the truth that had been buried for decades. The watchman watched silently, and I could feel his gratitude, a connection forged between the living and the dead. I hurried back to the police station, heart pounding with excitement. Detective Harris was astonished when I presented the evidence. He promised to reopen the case, and I felt a sense of accomplishment as I left the station. I knew that I had fulfilled a promise to the watchman, to bring justice to his memory. The investigation that followed uncovered a web of corruption involving several individuals connected to the town, leading to arrests and renewed interest in Officer Reynolds's case. As the truth came to light, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I could sense that the watchman was at peace, his spirit no longer bound to the earth. To this day, I still live in that small town, but now it feels different. The stories of the watchman have transformed. He is no longer just a legend, but a symbol of justice restored. And while the nights can still be quiet and eerie, I know that I am not alone. Somewhere out there, the watchman still keeps a silent vigil, ensuring that justice prevails. I never imagined I'd witness something that would challenge everything I believed about reality. My job as a patrol officer in a small southern town had its share of strange calls, lost dogs, petty thefts, the occasional domestic dispute. But what happened to me on a late October night in 2016 changed my life forever. This story isn't just a ghost tale. It's a memory I can't shake, no matter how much I want to. I was working the night shift, driving slowly down the empty streets of our quiet town. The air was cool, with a faint smell of burning wood from chimneys. My radio crackled occasionally, but mostly it was silent. It was around 2:30 a.m. when dispatch suddenly came through with a call. Unit 21, we've got a report of strange activity at the old Woodrow house on Sycamore Street. Neighbor claims to have seen lights inside, but the place has been abandoned for years. The Woodrow house was infamous around town. It had been vacant for decades, ever since its last owner, a man named Officer Henry Lewis, disappeared under mysterious circumstances back in the 1980s. Locals whispered about it being haunted, but I'd never paid much attention to those stories. Still, the idea of anyone breaking into that decrepit property seemed odd. I responded to the call, heading toward the darkened street where the Woodrow house sat at the end of the block, isolated by overgrown hedges and a rusted gate. The house was a crumbling Victorian with peeling paint and shattered windows. It looked more like a set from a horror movie than a real home. As I pulled up and shone my patrol car's spotlight on the house, I noticed something that made my stomach knot, a faint glow emanating from one of the upstairs windows. I radioed back to dispatch. Unit 21 on the scene at the Woodrow house. Light observed in the second-floor window. Going in to investigate. Pushing open the heavy front gate, I walked toward the house, flashlight in hand. The air felt heavier with every step, like the atmosphere itself didn't want me there. The front door creaked open with an eerie groan when I pushed it. Inside, the house smelled of mildew and decay. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs hung in thick clusters from the ceiling. My footsteps echoed loudly on the warped wooden floor. I moved cautiously, sweeping my flashlight across the foyer and into the adjoining rooms. Nothing seemed disturbed, just the usual signs of a long-abandoned home. As I climbed the creaking staircase to the second floor, my pulse quickened. The light I'd seen from outside flickered faintly under a closed door at the end of the hallway. The rest of the house was pitch black, making the glow even more unsettling. I drew my weapon, my hand trembling slightly, and called out, "This is the police. If anyone's here, show yourself." No response. I approached the door, my boots creaking against the floorboards. When I reached it, I hesitated for a moment before turning the knob. The door swung open, revealing an empty room. The faint glow came from an old desk lamp on a small table, its bulb sputtering weakly. The rest of the room was barren, except for a dusty chair and a framed photograph lying face down on the table. I picked up the photograph, brushing off the grime. It was an old black and white picture of Officer Henry Lewis in uniform, standing proudly next to a police cruiser from the 1970s. My breath caught in my throat. I'd seen his picture at the station, part of a tribute to officers who had died in the line of duty or gone missing. The air in the room grew colder, and I suddenly felt an overwhelming sensation of being watched. My flashlight beam wavered as I turned, scanning the room. That's when I saw him, just for a split second. A shadowy figure standing in the far corner, wearing what looked like a police uniform. His face was obscured, but I could feel his gaze locked onto me. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice breaking slightly. But as I stepped forward, the figure vanished. The lamp flickered and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. I stumbled out of the room, heart racing, and nearly fell down the stairs in my haste to leave. As I reached the front door, my radio crackled with static, and then a faint, garbled voice came through. It wasn't dispatch. "Help me." I froze. The voice sounded strained, almost desperate. "Who is this?" I asked, clutching the radio. There was no response, just static. I made it back to my patrol car, breathing hard, and radioed dispatch again. "Unit 21, there's something strange here. I think someone's inside, requesting backup." The dispatcher's reply was immediate but chilling. "Unit 21, backup isn't available. You're the only unit on the clock right now. Proceed with caution." Against my better judgment, I decided to re-enter the house. Something, or someone, was trying to communicate, and I couldn't just walk away. I pulled out my flashlight and headed back inside, determined to get to the bottom of this. As I explored the house further, I noticed a faint scratching sound coming from the basement. I hesitated, staring at the dark doorway that led down into the depths of the house. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I pushed forward. The basement stairs were steep and creaked ominously with every step. The scratching grew louder, more distinct as I descended. When I reached the bottom, I swept my flashlight across the room. It was cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and cobweb-covered tools. In the far corner, I saw what looked like a locked metal cabinet. The scratching was coming from inside it. I approached cautiously, my weapon drawn, and noticed that the cabinet door was secured with a rusted padlock. As I examined it, a sudden gust of icy air swept through the basement, extinguishing my flashlight. I fumbled to turn it back on, but before I could, the cabinet door swung open with a deafening bang. Inside, there was nothing but a dusty old police journal. I picked it up, my hands shaking, and flipped through the pages. It belonged to Officer Henry Lewis. The entries were dated from the weeks leading up to his disappearance, and they detailed his investigation into a series of disappearances in the town. The final entry sent chills down my spine. "They're watching me. I don't know who to trust anymore. If something happens to me, the truth is buried here in this house." God help whoever finds it. As I read those words, the basement door slammed shut above me, and the light bulb hanging overhead shattered, plunging me into darkness. Panic set in as I scrambled to find the stairs. My flashlight flickered back to life just in time for me to see him again. The shadowy figure of Officer Lewis, standing at the foot of the stairs, staring at me. This time, he spoke. "Leave. Now." His voice was a low, guttural whisper, filled with pain and warning. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted up the stairs, nearly tripping in my haste, and ran out of the house, clutching the journal tightly. When I finally reached my car, I looked back at the house. The light in the upstairs window was gone, and the entire property was shrouded in an unnatural darkness. I drove straight to the station, my hands trembling on the wheel. The next morning, I turned the journal over to my chief and told him everything that had happened. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he simply nodded and said, "You did the right thing." The journal sparked an investigation, and the evidence inside led to the discovery of human remains buried in the basement of the Woodrow house. They were identified as victims who had gone missing in the 1980s, and the case was finally closed. But Officer Henry Lewis's disappearance remains unsolved. I still don't know what I encountered that night, whether it was a ghost, a memory, or something else entirely. But one thing is certain. Officer Lewis wasn't just a legend. He was still watching over the town, ensuring that the truth was uncovered, even in death. I never went back to the Woodrow house, and I've avoided late-night shifts ever since. Some things are better left in the past, but part of me knows that Officer Lewis is still out there, standing guard in the shadows. I've been a cop for over a decade, and in that time, I've seen my share of disturbing things. Domestic disputes gone wrong, gruesome car accidents, the hollow stares of people who've lost everything. They all leave a mark. But nothing prepared me for what happened on a quiet stretch of Highway 62 on a freezing January night in 2019. It started like any other shift. I was patrolling the rural backroads of our small Ohio county, listening to the low hum of static from my police radio. The roads were eerily empty that night, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. Snowflakes drifted lazily down, the headlights of my cruiser catching them in brief, silvery bursts. Around 1:45 a.m., I got a call from dispatch. "Unit 12, we've got a report of a vehicle stranded on Highway 62, about 5 miles past the old McAllister rest stop. Caller stated their car stalled, and they're requesting assistance." "Copy that," I responded, turning onto the highway. It wasn't uncommon for people to underestimate the bitter cold and find themselves stuck out there, especially with how remote this part of the county was. The drive was uneventful until I reached the stretch of highway mentioned in the call. Up ahead, I saw a car pulled over on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking weakly. It was an older model sedan, the kind you'd expect a college kid to drive. I slowed down, pulling up behind the vehicle and turning on my spotlight to illuminate the scene. "Dispatch, Unit 12. I've got eyes on the vehicle. No visible occupants at this time. Investigating." As I stepped out of the cruiser, the cold hit me like a wall. My breath came out in thick clouds as I approached the car. I could see the windows were fogged up, which struck me as odd. If the engine wasn't running, the interior should have been freezing. I knocked on the driver's side window, the sound dull against the glass. "Police, is anyone in there?" No response. I shone my flashlight into the car and felt my stomach drop. The interior was empty, completely empty. No driver, no passengers, not even any belongings. Just a pristine, abandoned vehicle sitting there like it had been left minutes ago. I checked the license plate and radioed it in to dispatch. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Vehicle appears unoccupied. Can you run a plate check for me? Stand by, Unit 12. I walked around the car, shining my flashlight along the icy ground. There were no footprints in the snow, no sign that anyone had walked away from the vehicle. It was as if the driver had simply vanished. Dispatch came back on the radio a minute later. Unit 12, plate comes back clean. Registered to a Samantha Price, local resident. No outstanding warrants or alerts. Do you require additional assistance? I hesitated. There was something deeply unsettling about the scene, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Negative for now. Dispatch. I'll investigate further. I decided to check the surrounding area, even though my gut told me it was pointless. There was nothing out here but fields and trees for miles. Still, I pulled out my flashlight and headed toward the tree line, scanning the snow for any signs of movement. The quiet was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of my boots and the occasional gust of wind. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, like a woman sobbing, carried on the wind. I stopped in my tracks, straining to locate the source. It was coming from deeper in the woods. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay by the car, I started toward the sound. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the skeletal branches of the trees. "Hello?" I called out. "This is the police. Do you need help?" The sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. My pulse quickened, but I pressed on, trying to convince myself it was just someone in distress, scared or disoriented. As I moved deeper into the woods, I noticed something strange. The snow around me was undisturbed, not a single footprint leading toward where I'd heard the crying. The air grew colder, unnaturally so, and the beam of my flashlight began to flicker. I tapped it, cursing under my breath, when I saw something up ahead. A figure, a woman, standing motionless in the trees. Her back was to me, her long dark hair hanging in wet strands over her shoulders. She was wearing a thin dress, completely inappropriate for the freezing weather. "Ma'am?" I called out cautiously. "Are you hurt? I'm here to help." She didn't respond. She didn't even move. I took a step closer, the crunch of snow beneath my boots, deafening in the stillness. "Ma'am, I need you to turn around. Are you Samantha Price? Were you driving the vehicle back on the highway?" Still nothing. My gut told me to turn back, to leave whatever this was behind, but I took another step forward. As I did, the woman slowly tilted her head to the side, like she'd heard me but didn't quite understand the words. Then, in one sudden jerking motion, she turned to face me. I'll never forget what I saw. Her face was pale and sunken, her eyes black voids that seemed to swallow the light. Her mouth hung open in a silent scream, and frost clung to her lips and cheeks. For a moment, we just stood there, locked in some horrifying standoff. Then she moved, not walked, not ran, but glided toward me, her limbs bending in unnatural ways. I stumbled back, raising my flashlight as if it could somehow protect me. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "Stay where you are." But she didn't stop. She didn't make a sound, just kept coming. Panicked, I fumbled for my radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need backup now. There's someone out here, and I..." Before I could finish, the radio cut to static. The woman was just feet away now, her distorted features inches from my face. I stumbled backward, tripping over a fallen branch and landing hard in the snow. The cold seeped through my uniform as I scrambled to get up, but when I looked back, she was gone. The woods were empty, silent again, but the air felt heavier, like the world was holding its breath. I didn't waste another second. I ran back toward the highway, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I broke through the tree line, I saw that the car was gone. Not just empty, gone. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. My cruiser was still parked on the shoulder, its lights flashing rhythmically in the dark. I got in, locking the doors behind me, and radioed dispatch again. Dispatch, Unit 12. I need an update on that vehicle from earlier. It's not here anymore. Do you have any record of a tow truck or another officer on scene? There was a long pause before the dispatcher responded, her voice tinged with confusion. Unit 12, we have no record of any additional units or tow services in that area. Are you sure about the location? I didn't answer. Instead, I drove back to the station, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't file a full report that night. What could I even say? I left out the part about the woman, about her face, and the way she moved, and just logged it as an abandoned vehicle call with no resolution. But that wasn't the end of it. A week later, I looked up Samantha Price's name out of curiosity. What I found made my blood run cold. She had died in a car accident on Highway 62 exactly 5 years earlier, to the day. Witnesses reported seeing her car stall on the side of the road before she lost control and crashed into the tree line. Since that night, I've avoided Highway 62 whenever I can. But every now and then, when I'm working a late shift, I think about that woman in the woods. I can still hear the faint sound of her sobbing, carried on the wind. And sometimes, when I'm driving alone in the dark, I catch a glimpse of a faint glow in the distance, like hazard lights blinking in the snow. It was just another graveyard shift in late November, the kind that stretches into eternity, punctuated only by the occasional call. I was patrolling the eastern district of our city, a mix of industrial buildings, rundown neighborhoods, and stretches of nothingness. It was a cold, clear night, and the streets were silent, save for the occasional hum of passing cars in the distance. My coffee had gone lukewarm, and my radio crackled intermittently with static, typical white noise for the dead hours between midnight and dawn. At around 2:30 a.m., a call came through from dispatch. Unit 47, we've got a report of suspicious activity at the old Waterman textile factory on Holloway Street. Caller claims to have seen someone inside. Building's been abandoned for over a decade. Copy that, dispatch. Heading there now, I replied, suppressing a groan. The factory was a local legend among officers, a sprawling, decaying structure that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. We'd been called out there a dozen times for supposed trespassers, but it was always the same. Empty halls, graffiti-covered walls, and the unsettling hum of silence. I pulled up to the factory a few minutes later, parking my cruiser under a flickering street lamp. The building loomed in the dark, its shattered windows reflecting the moonlight like jagged teeth. The chain-link fence surrounding the property had long since been cut in several places, and the no trespassing signs hung crookedly, their warnings ignored by everyone, including me. As I approached the main entrance, flashlight in hand, I radioed in. Unit 47 on scene, no sign of movement outside, going in to investigate. The old wooden door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a cavernous space filled with the faint smell of mildew and rust. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of rusted machinery and piles of debris. The air inside was colder than outside, and every sound, every creak, every step seemed amplified, echoing back at me like a whispered threat. "Police, is anyone here?" I called out, my voice breaking the heavy silence. No response. I began sweeping the first floor, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. Most of the rooms were gutted, with crumbling walls and shattered glass underfoot. In the far corner of the main floor, I found a makeshift campsite, an old sleeping bag, a few empty cans of food, and a burned-out candle. It was clear someone had been here recently, but whoever it was, they weren't here now. Or so I thought. As I turned to leave the room, I heard it, a faint rustling sound coming from above me. I froze, listening intently. It could have been anything. Rats, the wind, a loose piece of metal. But it didn't feel right. It sounded deliberate, like footsteps trying to stay quiet. My grip tightened on my flashlight as I made my way to the staircase leading to the second floor. The stairs creaked loudly under my weight, each step feeling like it announced my presence to whatever, or whoever, was up there. The second floor was just as dilapidated as the first, with long, shadowy hallways stretching out in both directions. I swept my flashlight back and forth, checking each doorway as I moved. That's when I saw it. Movement at the end of the hall. A shadow darting quickly out of sight. "Stop! Police!" I shouted, drawing my sidearm. There was no reply, but I could hear footsteps now, heavier and faster, retreating deeper into the building. I took off after them, my adrenaline spiking as I rounded the corner into another hallway. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and I found myself staring at a dead end. The only door at the end of the hall was rusted shut, the kind you'd need a crowbar to budge. I swept the flashlight across the walls, looking for any sign of a hidden exit, but there was nothing. My breath came in shallow bursts as I tried to make sense of it. There was no way someone could have vanished that quickly. And then I heard it. Laughter. Low, guttural, and echoing all around me. It wasn't the kind of laughter that comes from something funny. It was mocking, cruel, and filled with malice. I spun around, my flashlight darting across the empty hallway. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The laughter stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. I stood there, heart pounding, waiting for something to happen. When nothing did, I slowly began backing toward the stairs, every instinct screaming at me to get out of there. As I reached the staircase, I heard it again. The footsteps. But this time, they weren't retreating. They were coming toward me. Fast. I turned, my flashlight trembling in my hand, but the hallway was empty. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer, until it felt like they were right in front of me. And then they stopped. The air turned icy, and for a moment, I couldn't move. My muscles locked up as an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. I don't know how to describe it, except to say it felt like I wasn't alone. Not just in the building, but in my own skin, like something was pressing against me from the inside. I forced myself to move, practically running down the stairs. As I reached the main floor, I heard the laughter again, this time echoing from every corner of the factory. It was louder now, overlapping, like multiple voices joining in. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief second, the beam caught something in the corner of the room, a figure standing in the shadows. It wasn't human. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs too long, its face obscured by darkness. I only saw it for a heartbeat before my flashlight went out completely, plunging me into darkness. I ran. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get out. The laughter followed me, growing louder and more distorted, like it was inside my head. I burst through the front door and into the freezing night air, gasping for breath. The laughter stopped the moment I crossed the threshold, leaving only the sound of my pounding heart and the distant hum of my cruiser's engine. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, the doors locked and the engine running. I radioed dispatch, my voice trembling as I tried to explain what had happened. They sent another unit to check the factory, but when they arrived, they found nothing. No campsite, no footprints, no sign of anyone or anything. I filed my report, leaving out the parts that would make me sound insane. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I encountered in that factory wasn't done with me. For weeks after, I had nightmares about the laughter, about the figure in the shadows. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear faint footsteps outside my house, even though no one was there. I don't patrol the Eastern District anymore. I requested a transfer to a quieter area, far from the factory and its shadows. But every now and then, I'll hear a story from another officer, a report of strange noises, or a figure glimpsed in the corner of someone's eye. They all laugh it off, chalking it up to overactive imaginations or pranks. But I know better. I know what's out there, lurking in the dark, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander into its domain. And I know it's only a matter of time before someone else doesn't make it out. I've worked as a police dispatcher in a small Appalachian town for nearly a decade. It's not the most exciting job, but it's steady, and you get used to the rhythm of it. The frantic calls about accidents, the routine welfare checks, and the occasional oddball complaint about a neighbor's dog barking too loud. But there's one call that still haunts me, years later. It wasn't just strange or unsettling. It was something worse, something I still can't explain. It was late December, right before Christmas. The night shift had started like any other, with me nursing a lukewarm cup of gas station coffee and listening to the crackle of the radio as officers checked in for the evening. The first few hours were quiet, save for a minor fender bender and a drunk guy passed out behind a convenience store. By 2 a.m., I was fighting to keep my eyes open, the hum of the fluorescent lights in the dispatch room lulling me into a trance. Then the call came in. 911, what's your emergency? I answered, straightening up in my chair. For a moment, there was nothing but static on the other end. I was about to repeat myself when a voice broke through, shaky and filled with panic. Please, you have to help me, the woman said, her words coming in quick, gasping bursts. He's outside. He's trying to get in. Ma'am, I need you to stay calm, I said, grabbing a notepad. What's your location? The line crackled again, and for a moment, I thought I'd lost her. Then she came back, her voice trembling. I'm at the old Kessler farmhouse. Please, The line went dead. I frowned, staring at the receiver in my hand. The Kessler farmhouse had been abandoned for years. It was one of those local legends, a place teenagers dared each other to spend the night, claiming it was haunted. I'd driven past it once, a crumbling 2-story relic on the edge of town, half swallowed by the surrounding forest. Unit 14, I said into the radio, my voice steady, despite the unease creeping in. Report of a possible intruder at the old Kessler farmhouse. Caller disconnected. Can you respond? There was a pause before Officer Ramirez came back on the line. 10-4 dispatch. En route now. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the blinking lights on the console. Something about the call didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the woman's voice, so raw, so desperate. Or maybe it was the fact that anyone would be at the Kessler place at this hour. 15 minutes passed. I radioed Ramirez for an update, but there was no response. Another 10 minutes went by, then 20. My unease deepened. Ramirez was one of the most reliable guys on the force, not the type to go silent without good reason. Unit 14, this is dispatch. Do you copy? I tried again. Nothing. I decided to send backup. Unit 22, Officer Green. Can you head to the Kessler farmhouse? Ramirez isn't responding. On it, Green replied. I watched the clock, my heart pounding in a way that felt irrational, but unstoppable. It was nearing 3:30 a.m. when Green's voice finally crackled through the radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 22. I'm on scene. Ramirez's cruiser is here, but no sign of him. Copy that, I said, my throat dry. Proceed with caution. Minutes stretched into eternity as I waited for Green to report back. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the console and the ticking of the wall clock. Then, Green's voice came through again, lower this time, almost a whisper. Dispatch, something's not right here. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? There's no sign of a struggle, no tracks in the snow leading away from the car. It's like he just vanished. I swallowed hard. And the house? I'm about to check it now, he said. I could hear the hesitation in his voice. Stand by. The radio went quiet again. I stared at the console, my hands gripping the edges of the desk. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The silence was unbearable. Unit 22, this is dispatch. Status update? I said, my voice shaking. Nothing. I was on the verge of calling the captain when the line crackled back to life. But it wasn't Green. It was Ramirez. Dispatch, he said, his voice distorted, almost unrecognizable. I need backup. Immediate backup. Ramirez, where are you? I demanded. Green's already on scene. He said you weren't there. There was a pause, and then Ramirez's voice came back, quieter now, almost a whisper. I'm in the house. Basement. I felt a chill run down my spine. What's your situation? Is Green with you? Another pause. Then, in a voice so faint I could barely hear it, Ramirez said, He's here too. The line went dead. I sat there, frozen, unsure of what to do. My instincts told me to send more backup, but something deeper, a primal fear I couldn't explain, told me that wouldn't help. I picked up the phone to call the captain, but before I could dial, the radio crackled again. Dispatch, Green's voice came through. I'm leaving the scene. I can't stay here. Green, what's going on? I asked, my voice cracking. He didn't answer. The radio went silent, and when I tried to raise him again, there was no response. 20 minutes later, I got a call from Green's wife, saying he'd come home, shaken and pale, refusing to talk about what happened. The next day, the chief organized a search party. They combed the farmhouse and the surrounding woods, but there was no sign of Ramirez or the woman who'd made the 911 call. The only thing they found was Ramirez's badge, lying in the middle of the basement floor, covered in a thin layer of frost. After that night, Green quit the force. He moved his family out of town, leaving no forwarding address. As for me, I stayed on, but I've never forgotten that call. Sometimes, late at night, when the radio crackles with static, I swear I hear Ramirez's voice, faint and distorted, whispering from somewhere far away. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the farmhouse, its dark windows staring back at me like empty eyes, and I wonder what would have happened if I'd been the one to answer that call. I never thought I'd be the one telling this kind of story. In my 10 years as a cop, I've dealt with my fair share of strange things. Drunks with wild claims, creepy abandoned houses, the occasional drugged-out hallucinating suspect, but nothing that ever made me question my grip on reality. That changed one frigid night in January, the kind of night where the world feels hushed under a blanket of frost. I was patrolling the edge of town, an area surrounded by thick woods and empty roads. It was nearing 2 a.m., the dead zone of the shift, when your mind starts playing tricks on you just to keep you awake. The radio had been quiet for a while, save for a call about a minor domestic disturbance that another unit had already handled. I was considering pulling into a gas station to grab another coffee when the dispatcher's voice crackled through. Unit 39, we've got a call from a resident out on Deep Hollow Road. Caller reports seeing flashing lights in the woods near her property. Might be a vehicle accident, possibly a stranded driver. Can you check it out? Deep Hollow Road was one of those stretches of asphalt that felt like it belonged to another century. No streetlights, no traffic, and just enough eerie folklore surrounding it to make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. The idea of flashing lights out there wasn't unheard of. Kids partying, hunters getting lost, or just plain pranksters, but it was strange enough to warrant a look. 10-4 dispatch. Heading out now, I replied, turning my cruiser onto the winding road. The trees closed in around me as I drove, their skeletal branches clawing at the starless sky. The frost glinted on the asphalt like broken glass, and my headlights seemed to barely cut through the darkness. I slowed as I neared the approximate location the caller had mentioned, rolling down my window to listen for any signs of life. Nothing. Just the faint rustle of wind through the trees. I pulled off onto the gravel shoulder and grabbed my flashlight. The cold hit me like a slap as I stepped out, my boots crunching on the frozen ground. I scanned the woods with my beam, looking for any sign of movement or the alleged flashing lights. After a few minutes, I caught something, a faint glimmer deep in the forest. It wasn't consistent, more like a flicker, as though someone were waving a flashlight or an old lantern. "Dispatch, I'm on scene," I said into my radio. "I see a faint light in the woods, approximately 200 yards from the road. I'm going to investigate." "Copy that, Unit 39. Proceed with caution," the dispatcher replied. The trek into the woods was slow and slippery. The ground was uneven, covered in patches of ice and dead leaves. The light ahead seemed to grow brighter as I approached, pulsing rhythmically now, almost hypnotically. My breath fogged in the freezing air, and every snap of a twig underfoot made me flinch. It felt too quiet, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. When I finally reached the source of the light, my stomach dropped. It was a police cruiser, its headlights flashing faintly, the red and blue strobes casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. The vehicle was half buried in a ditch, its front end crumpled against a tree. I recognized the number on the side, Unit 42. It belonged to Officer Tom Hensley, a veteran cop who'd been on the force for over 20 years. But Hensley wasn't supposed to be on duty tonight. In fact, I was sure he'd called out sick earlier in the week. "Unit 39 to dispatch," I said, my voice shaky. "I've located Unit 42 in the woods off Deep Hollow Road. The vehicle's been involved in an accident. No sign of Officer Hensley." There was a pause on the other end before the dispatcher responded. "Unit 42? That can't be right. Hensley isn't on duty tonight." "Well, his car is here," I said, my flashlight sweeping across the scene. The driver's door was open, but there was no blood, no signs of a struggle, just an empty car and a cold silence. "Copy, Unit 39. Stand by. We're sending backup," the dispatcher said. I checked the area around the vehicle, but there were no footprints in the snow, no indication of where Hensley or anyone else could have gone. The woods were so still it was unnerving, as though the crash hadn't disturbed them at all. And then I heard it. A voice, faint and distant, but unmistakable. "Help!" I froze, my ears straining. It came again, weaker this time. "Help me." It sounded like Hensley. but it was coming from deeper in the woods, beyond the reach of my flashlight. Every instinct screamed at me to wait for backup, but the thought of leaving a fellow officer out there, possibly injured, wasn't something I could stomach. "Hang on, Hensley," I shouted, pushing deeper into the forest. The voice led me on, always just out of reach, always fading before I could pinpoint its source. I called out repeatedly, but the only response was that same faint, desperate plea. "Help me." As I moved further into the woods, the air grew colder, unnaturally so, and the darkness seemed to press in around me. My flashlight started to flicker, its beam dimming and sputtering, despite the fresh batteries I'd loaded in earlier that night. The voice grew quieter, weaker, until it stopped altogether. And that's when I realized something was wrong. I'd been following the voice for what felt like miles, but when I turned around, I couldn't see my tracks in the snow. The forest behind me looked different, unfamiliar, as though the trees had shifted while I wasn't looking. Panic set in. I tried to radio dispatch, but all I got was static. My flashlight flickered once more before dying completely, plunging me into darkness. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to orient myself, when I heard something else. Footsteps. They weren't mine. They were slow, deliberate, and coming from behind me. "Who's there?" I shouted, my hand going to my holster. The footsteps stopped, replaced by a low, guttural laugh. It wasn't Hensley. It wasn't human. The sound sent a wave of terror through me, and I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I don't know how long I ran for, but eventually, I saw the faint glow of headlights through the trees. Stumbling out of the woods, I found myself back on Deep Hollow Road, gasping for breath as another patrol car pulled up. It was Officer Mills. "Jesus, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, helping me into the passenger seat. "Where's Hensley?" He's gone," I stammered. "His car's in the woods, but he's not there." "Something's wrong, Mills. Something's out there." Mills didn't press me for details, but the look on his face told me he believed me more than he wanted to admit. Backup arrived soon after, and they searched the area thoroughly, but they found nothing. No sign of Hensley, no footprints, and no strange voices. The cruiser was towed out of the woods, but its onboard computer had been wiped clean, as though it had never been logged into that night. Hensley was officially declared missing a week later. His disappearance was ruled unexplained, though rumors swirled among the department. Some said he'd run off. Others whispered about the strange things that had happened on Deep Hollow Road over the years. Disappearances, strange lights, and voices in the dark. I transferred to a different precinct shortly after. I couldn't drive past those woods without feeling like something was watching me, something waiting for its next victim. Even now, years later, I still hear his voice in my dreams, calling out for help, leading me back into that endless frozen forest. I joined the Rustwood Police Department fresh out of the academy, eager to make a difference in a small town where nothing ever seemed to happen. Rustwood had one main street, a smattering of mom-and-pop shops, and a population of fewer than 5,000. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, and gossip traveled faster than the news. But it also had its secrets, and one of them would haunt me for the rest of my life. It started on a night shift in early March. The air was damp and cold, clinging to everything like a wet sheet. I was working with Officer Darren Tate, a grizzled veteran who liked his coffee black and his jokes darker. It was a quiet night so far, just a noise complaint and a cat stuck in a storm drain. The kind of stuff we were used to. Around midnight, The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. Unit 12, we've got a call about a disturbance at the old lumber mill on Crestline. Lights reported inside. Could be trespassers or vandals. The lumber mill had been abandoned for decades. Its rusting machinery and crumbling walls, a magnet for bored teenagers and urban explorers. But the place gave me the creeps. Locals whispered about accidents that had happened there. A man crushed by a falling beam, another who disappeared during his shift and was never found. People swore it was haunted, but I chalked it up to small-town superstition. Dispatch, this is Unit 12, we're on it, Darren replied, already pulling the cruiser toward Crestline. The road to the mill wound through dense woods, the kind that seemed to swallow your headlights. The deeper we drove, the darker it got, until even the moonlight seemed to vanish. By the time we reached the mill, my unease had grown into a tangible weight in my chest. The building loomed ahead of us, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the starless sky. Darren parked the cruiser just outside the main gate, which hung open on rusted hinges. I stepped out, the crunch of gravel under my boots loud in the oppressive silence. You nervous? Darren asked, a smirk tugging at his lips as he pulled out his flashlight. Just not a fan of abandoned places, I admitted, trying to sound casual. He chuckled. You'll get used to it. Come on. We entered the mill through a side door, our flashlights slicing through the darkness. The air inside was colder than outside, heavy with the scent of mildew and rust. Our footsteps echoed off the concrete floors, the sound magnified in the empty space. Rustwood PD, Darren called out. His voice bounced off the walls, swallowed by the shadows. If anyone's in here, make yourself known. No response. We moved deeper into the mill, stepping over debris and ducking under low-hanging beams. The place felt alive in a way I couldn't explain, like it was watching us, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, but every room we checked was empty. Then we found the first clue. Hey, over here, Darren said, his flashlight fixed on the floor. I walked over to see what he'd found, a trail of muddy footprints leading deeper into the building. They were fresh, the tread marks still distinct. Looks like we've got someone after all, Darren muttered, his tone shifting to something more serious. We followed the footprints down a long corridor that opened into what must have been the main production floor. The space was massive, with towering machines that loomed like metal giants in the dark. The footprints stopped abruptly in the middle of the room, as if whoever made them had vanished into thin air. That's weird, I said, shining my light around. They can't just stop. Darren frowned, scanning the room. Maybe they backtracked and we didn't notice. But before we could double back, a sound broke the silence, a faint, metallic clanging, coming from somewhere above us. We both froze, our eyes snapping to the source. There, on the second level, a figure moved. It was just a shadow, barely visible in the dim light filtering through the broken windows. But it was enough to set my nerves on edge. The figure stood motionless for a moment, before slipping out of sight. Stay here, Darren said, already heading for the staircase. What? No way. I'm coming with you, I protested, but he shook his head. Protocol. Someone stays down here in case they double back. Don't worry. I'll holler if I need you. I wanted to argue, but he was already climbing the stairs, his flashlight bouncing with each step. I stayed where I was, my flashlight scanning the room, every shadow suddenly alive with potential. The seconds dragged into minutes, and the oppressive silence returned. Then I heard it. A low, guttural sound, almost like a growl. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, echoing through the mill. My heart pounded as I turned toward the source, my flashlight trembling in my hand. "Darren?" I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. No answer. The growling grew closer, resonating in my chest like a vibration. I backed up instinctively, my light sweeping across the room. And then I saw it. Something was standing in the shadows near one of the machines. It was tall, its outline hunched and misshapen, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its eyes reflected the beam of my flashlight, 2 pinpoints of pale light that felt impossibly cold. I froze, unable to move or speak. The thing stared at me for what felt like an eternity before it let out a sound, a screech so piercing it felt like it was splitting my skull. Then it moved, faster than anything I'd ever seen, disappearing into the darkness. "Darren!" I screamed, bolting for the stairs. When I reached the 2nd floor, I found his flashlight lying on the ground, the beam flickering weakly, but Darren was gone. There were no footprints, no signs of a struggle, just empty space and that suffocating silence. I radioed for backup, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what had happened. A search team arrived within the hour, combing through the mill and the surrounding woods, but they found nothing. Darren was gone, and no one could explain how or why. The official report listed him as missing, presumed dead. The department chalked it up to a tragic accident. Maybe he fell into one of the old machinery pits, or wandered into the woods and succumbed to the elements. But I knew better. I saw that thing, whatever it was, and I knew it had taken him. I transferred out of Rustwood a month later. I couldn't stay, not with the mill looming at the edge of town, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. But even now, miles away, I can't escape it. I dream about that night, about the growling in those eyes. And sometimes, when I wake in the dead of night, I hear that screech again, echoing in the corners of my mind, reminding me that Darren's still out there somewhere, and that it's waiting for me to come back. I didn't become a cop to chase ghosts or unravel mysteries. I joined the force because I wanted to make a difference, to protect people, and to bring a sense of order to the chaos. But there are some nights when the chaos swallows you whole. There are some nights you can't explain, no matter how much you try. This is about one of those nights. It started like any other graveyard shift in the quiet town of Latham Springs, Texas. I was sitting in my cruiser near the edge of town, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm an hour ago, when dispatch buzzed in. "Unit 15, we've got a 911 call from 1127 Maple Drive." Caller disconnected before providing details, but there was a lot of static and what sounded like someone crying. "Can you respond?" Maple Drive wasn't a busy area. It was a lonely stretch of road on the outskirts of town, lined with a mix of old houses and overgrown lots. 1127 was one of those properties everyone knew about, but didn't talk about much. The house had been abandoned for years, its windows boarded up, and its paint peeling from years of neglect. Locals said it was haunted, classic small-town lore. But there'd never been any trouble there, just another relic of a forgotten past. 10-4, dispatch. En route now, I said, tossing my coffee into the cup holder and flipping on the cruiser's lights. The drive to Maple Drive was uneventful, the streets eerily quiet. When I pulled up to 1127, I felt a strange chill run down my spine. The house stood there like a monument to decay, its dark silhouette framed by a moonless sky. The yard was overgrown, the grass reaching almost to my knees as I stepped out of the cruiser. I scanned the area with my flashlight. No signs of life, no lights in the windows. Nothing to suggest anyone had been here in years. "Dispatch, this is Unit 15. I'm at the location. The property looks abandoned. No visible activity," I reported. "Copy that, Unit 15. "Proceed to check the premises," came the reply. I approached the house, my boots crunching on the gravel path. The porch creaked ominously as I stepped onto it, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. The front door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me inside. "Latham Springs Police Department," I called out, pushing the door open with my flashlight. "Anyone here?" The smell hit me first, stale, damp, with an undercurrent of something metallic. The interior was worse than I'd imagined. The walls were streaked with grime, and broken furniture was scattered across the floor. It looked like no one had set foot in here for years. And yet, I could hear something, faint, almost imperceptible at first, a soft, muffled sobbing coming from somewhere deeper inside the house. I felt my pulse quicken. "Hello? This is the police. I'm here to help," I said, moving toward the sound. The sobbing grew louder as I made my way down a narrow hallway. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, the kind with faded floral patterns that might have been cheerful decades ago. Now, they just looked sad. I reached a doorway at the end of the hall. The crying was coming from inside. I took a deep breath, one hand on my holstered weapon, and stepped through. The room was empty, but the crying was still there, echoing softly, as if the walls themselves were weeping. My flashlight swept the space, illuminating an overturned chair, a broken lamp, and a single photograph lying face down on the floor. I picked it up. It was an old black and white picture of a family, 2 parents and a little girl, standing in front of what looked like this very house. Their smiles were forced, their eyes unsettlingly blank. As I stared at the photo, the sobbing stopped, and then I heard something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from upstairs. "Dispatch, I need backup at 1127 Maple Drive," I said into my radio, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm hearing movement inside the house. Possible intruder." "Copy that, Unit 15. Backup is en route," the dispatcher replied. I moved cautiously toward the staircase, my flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. The stairs groaned under my weight as I ascended, the sound of the footsteps growing louder with each step. By the time I reached the second floor, the noise had stopped. There were 3 doors at the top of the stairs. 2 were closed. One was slightly ajar, light spilling out from within. I approached the open door, my hand gripping my sidearm. "Latham Springs Police, show yourself," I barked. I pushed the door open, and my heart nearly stopped. The room was completely intact, unlike the rest of the house. It looked like a child's bedroom, untouched by time. The bed was neatly made with a pink quilt, and stuffed animals lined the shelves. A small wooden rocking horse stood in the corner, its paint faded but otherwise pristine. And sitting on the bed was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her hair in long, dark braids. She wore a white dress that looked old-fashioned, almost like something from the early 1900s. She was staring at me, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice softer now. "What's your name? Are you lost?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to the corner of the room where the rocking horse stood. I turned to look, and my blood ran cold. Standing behind the rocking horse was a figure. Tall, shadowy, its features obscured, but its presence undeniable. Its head tilted unnaturally to the side, as if studying me. My flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering before plunging the room into darkness. I drew my weapon, my heart hammering in my chest. "Stay where you are," I shouted. When the light came back, the room was empty. The girl was gone. The figure was gone. Even the rocking horse had disappeared. The room was now just as decrepit as the rest of the house. the bed reduced to a collapsed heap of rotting wood. I stumbled back into the hallway, my breath coming in short gasps. The radio crackled to life. "Unit 15, what's your status? Backup is arriving on scene." "Get them inside now," I managed to say, my voice shaking. "There's something in here." I made my way downstairs, just as two other officers burst through the front door, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words felt hollow even as I said them. Together, we searched the house from top to bottom. There was no sign of the girl, the shadowy figure, or even the photograph I'd found. The report we filed that night was vague. Possible trespasser, house cleared, no further action required. But I knew the truth. Something was in that house, something that didn't want us there. I never went back to 1127 Maple Drive, and as far as I know, no other calls ever came from that address. The house still stands, though, its windows like empty eyes staring out at the world. Every time I drive past it, I feel that same chill, a reminder of the night I came face to face with something I can't explain, something I pray I never see again. It was the summer of 2018, and I had just completed my training at the police academy. As a fresh officer in the small town of Hillcrest, North Carolina, I was eager to prove myself. Hillcrest was quiet, almost too quiet, and most of my shifts consisted of patrolling empty streets, issuing warnings for minor infractions, and getting to know the locals. But I quickly learned that beneath the town's tranquil surface lay a web of secrets that would soon ensnare me. One evening, I was paired with Officer Morales, a seasoned officer known for his laid-back attitude and expertise in local lore. We were assigned to the night shift, and as darkness fell, he shared stories about the nearby Whispering Woods, a place known for strange sounds and eerie occurrences. "They say you can hear voices in those woods," Morales said, chuckling. "People claim they hear their names being called or whispers warning them to stay away." "Just urban legends," I scoffed, rolling my eyes. "You know how it is." "Maybe, but it's fun to think about," he replied with a grin. As the hours passed and the night deepened, our patrol took us closer to the woods. The trees loomed ominously, their gnarled branches stretching out like fingers, trying to grasp at the night sky. The radio crackled with chatter from other units, but everything felt strangely still. "Let's do a quick drive through the woods," Morales suggested, his eyes glinting with mischief. "I'll show you where the fun is." "Sure, why not?" I said, more out of curiosity than belief. We drove along the gravel road that cut through the trees, the headlights illuminating the path ahead. The air grew cooler, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. The trees seemed to lean closer, their trunks twisted and contorted. As we went deeper, I began to feel an unsettling presence, as if we were being watched. "Pull over here," Morales said, gesturing to a small clearing. I parked the cruiser, and we stepped out into the quiet. "Listen," he said, holding up a hand. At first, all I could hear was the rustling of leaves, but then I caught it. A faint sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. It was indistinct, like voices murmuring just beyond my comprehension. I glanced at Morales, who was staring into the darkness, a look of intrigue on his face. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Yeah, it's just the wind," he replied, but I could tell he was just as uneasy as I was. We stood there for a moment, listening. The whispers grew louder, swirling around us, and I felt a cold gust of wind sweep through the clearing. I instinctively took a step back, suddenly aware of how isolated we were. "Let's get back in the car," I suggested, my voice barely above a whisper. Just as we turned to head back, the radio crackled again. "Unit 12, we have a report of a missing person, last seen near Whispering Woods. Can you respond?" "Copy that, dispatch. We're already in the area," Morales replied, his tone shifting from casual to serious. We hurried back to the cruiser, our earlier bravado replaced by a sense of urgency. The radio chatter continued, detailing the missing person, an 18-year-old girl named Sarah, who had gone for a walk in the woods hours earlier. Her friends reported her missing when she failed to return, and they'd last seen her near the entrance of the trail. "Let's head back to the main road and see if we can find her," Morales said, already backing out of the clearing. We drove slowly along the winding path, the trees looming overhead like dark sentinels. The whispers seemed to grow louder again, as if calling out to us. I shook my head, trying to clear my mind. It was just the wind, I told myself. As we approached the entrance to the trail, we spotted a group of worried friends gathered near the parking lot, their faces pale and anxious. I stepped out of the cruiser to gather information. "Did any of you see which way she went?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the growing unease in my stomach. One of the girls, her eyes red from crying, nodded. "She said she wanted to go a little deeper into the woods. She thought she heard something." "Something?" I asked, frowning. "Like whispers," another friend chimed in. "She thought it was just the wind, but it sounded like someone calling her name." Morales and I exchanged glances. We had to find her. We decided to split up, each taking a different path deeper into the woods. I felt a knot of apprehension in my stomach as I stepped away from the group. The darkness enveloped me, the whispers intensifying as I walked further in. Each step felt heavier, as if the woods themselves were trying to hold me back. "Sarah," I called out, my voice swallowed by the thick air. "Are you here?" Nothing. Just the whispers. As I ventured deeper, I caught sight of something ahead, movement in the shadows. I quickened my pace, heart racing. It could be her. "Sarah!" I shouted again, desperation creeping into my voice. But as I got closer, I realized it was just a deer, darting away into the trees. I paused, catching my breath, and tried to calm my racing heart. The whispers grew louder, and I suddenly felt as though the trees were closing in on me. Just then, my radio crackled again. "Unit 12, we've got a visual on Sarah's phone near the edge of the woods. Can you make your way back?" "Copy that," I responded, relief flooding through me. I turned to head back, but before I could retrace my steps, something caught my eye. A flicker of movement to my left. I froze, straining my ears to hear the whispers again. But this time, they sounded different, urgent, insistent. They were calling my name. "Officer Collins," they whispered, and I felt a chill sweep through me. I shook my head, trying to clear my mind. "It's just the wind," I muttered, forcing myself to move forward. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the woods, sending a jolt of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I turned in the direction of the sound, heart pounding. The whispers were gone, replaced by a heavy silence that felt oppressive. "Sarah," I called again, fear clawing at my throat. I reached the edge of the clearing where the group had last been. But as I stepped out of the trees, I was met with an unsettling sight. The group was still gathered, but their faces were no longer filled with concern. They looked frozen, staring into the woods with wide eyes, as if something had terrified them into silence. "What happened?" I demanded, my voice sharp. One of the boys turned to me, his face pale. "We heard her scream," It came from deeper in the woods. Without thinking, I sprinted back into the trees, fear propelling me forward. "Sarah!" I shouted, my voice echoing into the darkness. I reached a small clearing, and my heart dropped. There, in the moonlight, was Sarah, sitting on the ground, her eyes wide and unseeing. "Sarah!" I yelled, rushing to her side. But as I approached, she turned her head slowly, her gaze unfocused. "They're calling me," she said, her voice distant. "I have to go." "Who's calling you?" I asked, my heart racing. "You need to come with me. We're getting you out of here." She shook her head, her expression vacant. "They need me to stay. They want me." Before I could react, she stood up abruptly and began walking deeper into the woods. I lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "No, you have to come back." In that moment, the whispers returned, overwhelming, deafening. I felt the ground beneath my feet shift, as if the forest was alive, pulling us in different directions. "Let go of me," she screamed, panic in her eyes. "Sarah, please," I pleaded, desperately trying to pull her back. Suddenly, the world around us shifted. The whispers morphed into a cacophony of voices, filling the air with an unbearable weight. I felt as if I was being dragged down, the darkness closing in. In a burst of adrenaline, I yanked her toward me with every ounce of strength I had. She stumbled back, breaking the spell. The whispers faded, and the oppressive air lifted slightly. "Let's go, now," I shouted, dragging her back toward the entrance of the woods. We sprinted through the trees, and as we reached the edge of the clearing, I looked back. For a split second, I thought I saw shadowy figures standing among the trees, their outlines flickering in the dark. "Don't look back," I urged her, focusing on getting her back to safety. We broke through the underbrush and emerged into the parking lot, breathless and terrified. The friends rushed over, relief washing over their faces as they saw Sarah safe. "Where were you?" one of them asked, her voice shaking. She was lost," I stammered, still shaken. "We need to call for backup and get the area checked out." As the other officers arrived, I felt the weight of the night pressing down on me. The shadows of the woods loomed behind us, dark and forbidding. I had heard the whispers, felt their pull, and somehow we had escaped. In the following weeks, we investigated the area further, but we never found anything that could explain the whispers or the shadowy figures. Sarah was shaken but unharmed, and the town breathed a sigh of relief. But I knew the truth. The whispering woods held secrets that were better left undisturbed. I still patrol those streets, but I never drive near the woods at night. The memory of that night lingers, a reminder of the darkness that can exist just beneath the surface of a quiet town. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can still hear the whispers calling out to me. It was a chilly autumn evening in Pine Hollow, a small, seemingly tranquil town, nestled in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. I had just graduated from the police academy and was excited for my first assignment as a patrol officer. Most of my colleagues had been here for years, and they often shared ghost stories about the town's old buildings, dark woods, and forgotten trails. I brushed these tales off as small-town folklore, but little did I know that I was about to face something far more sinister than mere urban legends. My partner that night was Officer Daniels, a veteran cop with a knack for keeping things light, even in tense situations. As we cruised the dimly lit streets, he pointed out various landmarks: the old church, the abandoned mill, and the infamous Pine Hollow woods, which locals warned against entering after dark. There are stories about those woods, Daniels said with a chuckle. Some say they're haunted. Others say a cult used to meet there. I laughed it off, eager to make a name for myself. Come on, it's just a bunch of trees. What could possibly be scary about that? As the hours passed, our shift was uneventful, the quiet streets giving me a sense of comfort. It wasn't until near the end of the shift that dispatch buzzed in with a call that would change everything. Unit 24, we have a 911 call from a woman near Pine Hollow Woods. She reported seeing a figure lurking in the trees and believes it may be a missing person. Proceed with caution. Copy that, dispatch, I replied, adrenaline spiking as we made our way toward the woods. When we arrived, the air felt thick with tension. A woman stood by the roadside, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. I stepped out of the cruiser, feeling the chill of the night air bite through my uniform. Ma'am, what's going on? I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. I was walking my dog, she said, her voice trembling. He ran into the woods, and I heard something. Someone. I think they're hurt. Daniels and I exchanged a glance, sensing the urgency in her tone. Stay here, I instructed her, and we'll check it out. With flashlights in hand, we stepped into the darkness of Pine Hollow Woods. The trees loomed overhead, their branches swaying in the wind like skeletal fingers reaching out for us. I could hear the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of owls. But the deeper we went, the more isolated I felt. Are you sure we should be doing this? I whispered to Daniels as we moved cautiously through the underbrush. He shrugged, trying to maintain a light-hearted demeanor. It's probably just a lost hiker or someone messing around. We'll be fine. We pressed on, calling out every few minutes for anyone who might be in distress. But all we received in return was silence. Then, as we reached a small clearing, I spotted something, a flash of color amidst the brown and gray. My heart raced as I approached. It was a woman's scarf, vibrant red against the damp earth. My instincts kicked in, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. Daniels, over here! He hurried to my side, examining the scarf. This doesn't look good. We need to keep looking. We split up again, me going deeper into the woods while he circled the perimeter. The whispers of the wind began to echo around me, and I felt an unsettling sensation that I was not alone. The darkness seemed to thicken, pressing in from all sides. Then I heard it, a soft moan, barely audible over the sound of my own breathing. It was coming from deeper within the woods. Hello? I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Is anyone there? The moan turned into a low whimper, and I rushed toward the sound. Hold on, I'm coming, I shouted, my heart racing as I pushed through the thick underbrush. As I stumbled into a small clearing, my flashlight illuminated a figure lying on the ground. It was a young woman, dirty and disheveled, her face streaked with tears. I knelt beside her, relieved, but all filled with dread. Are you okay? What happened? She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. He's coming, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. He won't let me leave. Who won't let you leave? I asked, feeling a chill creep up my spine. But before she could answer, I heard it. The sound of footsteps approaching from behind me. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping the area. There was nothing there, just the oppressive darkness closing in around us. Stay here, I told her, my heart pounding in my chest as I rose to my feet. I felt a surge of adrenaline, ready to confront whatever was lurking in the shadows. Please, don't leave me, she cried out, her voice filled with terror. Daniels, I shouted, hoping my partner would hear me. But the only response was the rustling of leaves in the wind. The footsteps grew louder, and panic set in. I turned back to the woman. but she was no longer there. The clearing felt empty, as if she had vanished into thin air. My mind raced, and I fought against the feeling of dread that clawed at my insides. Where did she go? I mumbled to myself, fear gripping me like a vice. Just then, my radio crackled to life. Unit 24, this is dispatch. Are you in the woods? We've received multiple reports of strange sounds and a possible cult sighting near your location. Please respond. I grabbed my radio, my hands shaking. Dispatch, I need backup. There's a woman in the woods. She's scared, and I think she's in danger. Unit 24, we need you to return to your vehicle immediately. There have been reports of suspicious activity in the area, the dispatcher warned. Negative, I'm not leaving her, I shouted, heart racing as I felt the shadows closing in around me. I need backup now. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash, followed by frantic rustling in the bushes. My instincts kicked in, and I turned my flashlight toward the noise. For a moment, I saw it, a dark figure standing just beyond the trees, watching me. Daniels, I called out, but the figure didn't move. It simply stood there, cloaked in darkness, its presence suffocating. Officer Collins, my radio blared again. Return to your vehicle immediately. Ignoring the order, I crept closer to the figure, adrenaline coursing through my veins. As I approached, the figure slowly began to step back into the shadows, almost like it was inviting me to follow. I turned back to the clearing, desperate to find the woman, but she was gone. Panic surged within me. Sarah, I yelled, hoping she could hear me, but only silence answered. With a deep breath, I turned and sprinted back toward where I'd left her. The whispers returned, rising to a crescendo in my ears. They felt like they were calling my name, beckoning me deeper into the darkness. I fought the urge to stop and listen, forcing myself to keep moving. As I reached the clearing, I found Daniels finally emerging from the shadows, his face pale and eyes wide. I heard something. It sounded like someone was screaming, he said, clearly shaken. Did you see her? I gasped, my heart pounding. No, I thought I heard you calling for help, he replied, glancing back into the trees nervously. She was right here, I shouted, frustration boiling over. She said someone was after her. Daniels took a step back, looking uneasy. We need to get out of here, Collins. This isn't right. Just then, my radio buzzed again. Unit 24, you need to leave the area immediately. There's been a report of a body found near the entrance of the woods. We're sending backup now. A chill ran down my spine as I exchanged a glance with Daniels. We have to go, I said, my voice trembling. We turned to leave, but as we stepped back into the trees, the whispers intensified, surrounding us like a cacophony of voices. I felt a tug at my heart, an overwhelming sense of dread pulling me back. Run, Daniels shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me forward. We sprinted through the woods, the whispers fading into the distance. As we reached the edge of the trees, the sight of the parking lot filled me with a sense of relief. We burst into the clearing, where our cruiser waited, illuminated by the headlights of the approaching backup. But as we reached the vehicle, a figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the light. It was the woman, her clothes tattered and her face blank, as if she were in a trance. Help me, she whispered, her eyes vacant. I stumbled back, horror flooding my senses. Sarah, I yelled, but it felt like a dream, a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Before I could react, the figure turned and ran back into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I felt a surge of panic as I watched her go, but Daniels pulled me back. We need to leave now, he shouted. We jumped into the cruiser, and as we sped away, the echoes of the whispers faded behind us, replaced by the sound of our own rapid breathing. I glanced back at the woods, my heart racing, and wondered what secrets Pine Hollow truly held. The reports continued to haunt me. The woman was never found. Some said she was taken by the cult that once roamed those woods. Others believed she simply vanished into thin air. The case was classified as a missing persons report, but I knew in my heart that we had stumbled upon something darker that night. Months later, the woods still loomed in my mind, a constant reminder of that fateful evening. I could still hear the whispers calling to me, urging me to return. But deep down, I knew some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved, hidden in the shadows of Pine Hollow.